The frost-laden dawn broke over Frosthaven with a hush that felt wrong, as though the city itself held its breath. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, settling on the rooftops, muffling the sounds of the waking streets. Yet beneath the quiet, unease throbbed like a heartbeat. The people had seen their lord walk through fire untouched. Some called it miracle, others called it witchcraft. In the great hall, banners stirred faintly in the draught as Rohan Iceborn stood before the long table of lords and captains. The trial by flame had silenced the council's immediate cries for exile or execution, but not their suspicion. He could feel it in their stares, sharp, calculating, fearful. "Frosthaven is split," Aelin murmured at his side, her voice barely audible over the crackling hearth. "Half of them would follow you to the gates of the underworld. The other half would sooner see you buried beneath it." Rohan's jaw tightened. "And Kaelor smiles, knowing doubt is sharper than any blade." The High Elder rapped his staff, calling the chamber to order. His voice carried the weight of years, though it trembled now. "The flame has spoken. Lord Rohan is no creature of sorcery, but man. Yet whispers still spread, and whispers have toppled thrones before." He leaned forward, eyes clouded but piercing. "We must act, before the shadow beyond the mountains grows bolder." At that, murmurs rippled through the hall. Captain Tervain, scarred, weary, yet unyielding, rose first. "The raiders we crushed were not acting alone. Scouts report strange banners in the east, fire-blackened cloth marked with runes none can read. If Kaelor has allies, they gather there." And here, Lady Eris interjected sharply, her gaze like a dagger at Rohan. "You speak of shadows beyond our walls while one festers inside them. The flame may have spared him, but no fire burns without smoke. Can you not smell it, lords? Frosthaven's halls reek of sorcery still." Rohan's hand clenched on the table. He wanted to lash out, to silence her venom with cold truth, but Aelin's hand brushed his wrist, a warning. He forced his voice steady. "If you doubt me, Lady Eris, then march at my side when I hunt Kaelor. See for yourself whether my sword is guided by curse or by will." Her lips curved in a thin smile. "Perhaps I will, if only to watch when that will falters." The chamber dissolved into argument, voices rising, accusations flung like arrows. Some demanded war against the eastern banners, others pressed for walls and watchmen. A few whispered of alliances, of calling aid from southern kingdoms. Rohan listened, every word feeding the storm in his chest. They were right about one thing: Frosthaven was divided. And Kaelor would not wait. That night, the frost deepened. Rohan stood on the battlements, the black crystal heavy at his side, its pulse faint but insistent. The city below lay quiet, but the quiet was fragile, stretched thin over fear and suspicion. Aelin joined him, her cloak whipping in the wind. "You passed the flame, Rohan. But they will not forgive so easily. Every time you draw breath, half of Frosthaven sees a lord. The other half sees a monster." He exhaled, watching his breath mist. "Then I'll give them no choice. I'll hunt Kaelor to his lair, and I'll tear the shadow from its root." Aelin's gaze held his, fierce, unyielding. "Then you'll need more than a sword. You'll need allies who do not fear the dark." Before Rohan could answer, a raven landed on the parapet. Its feathers glistened with frost, its eyes glowing faintly red. Around its leg was tied a scrap of parchment. Aelin snatched it, unrolled it, and read. Her face paled. "It's not from Kaelor. It's from within Frosthaven." Rohan frowned. "What does it say?" She handed it to him. The script was jagged, hurried. "The sorcerer walks among you already. Not in the east. In Frosthaven." The wind howled across the battlements, and the crystal pulsed like a second heartbeat. Rohan's eyes darkened. If Kaelor was already inside the walls, then Frosthaven was not besieged from without. It was rotting from within. And the hunt would begin here. The hall of Frosthaven groaned with silence, as though even the stones of its ancient walls held their breath. Hundreds pressed shoulder to shoulder, lords and peasants alike, all gathered to watch the judgment of their lord. A single fire burned at the chamber's heart, the flame of the ancestors, rising high from the stone brazier that had never once gone cold in all the centuries of Frosthaven's line. Rohan stood before it, cloak torn from his shoulders, armor stripped away. He wore only a simple tunic, bare of sigils or lordly crests, a man reduced to nothing but flesh and spirit. Yet the mark of his power could not be hidden. Frost clung to his dark hair, curling like a crown of winter, and the black crystal pulsed faintly beneath his chest, visible through the fabric like a second heart. The High Elder lifted his staff, its silver tip gleaming in the firelight. "Rohan of Frosthaven, called Iceborn, you stand accused of harboring sorcery not granted by the gods, but stolen from darker hands. Today, the flame shall decide. Step forward." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some voices hissed for mercy, others spat for blood. The banners overhead swayed as if stirred by a storm not yet arrived. Aelin stood to the side of the dais, her face pale, lips pressed into a hard line. Her eyes never left Rohan. She had begged him not to submit, begged him to ride away, to take the name Iceborn and forge a realm beyond the council's reach. But Rohan had refused. "If I flee, the name dies a coward's death," he had told her. "If I burn, let them see it with their own eyes." Now, as he stepped closer to the flame, Aelin's hand trembled at her dagger. She could not save him here. No blade, no oath, no defiance could sway what was about to happen. The fire roared as he approached. It was no ordinary fire. Legend said it burned with the breath of the first kings, a flame that knew truth from falsehood. Many had been tested before it, thieves, traitors, even a queen once accused of kin-slaying. The innocent emerged unscathed. The guilty were reduced to ash before the crowd's eyes. Rohan lifted his gaze to the blaze. It shimmered with hues of gold and white, yet as he neared, he thought he saw veins of blue in its heart. A cold fire that seemed to beckon him. The High Elder's voice echoed again. "Step into the flame. Let the ancestors speak." Rohan's jaw tightened. His men, what remained of them, stood among the crowd, their faces tense with fear and awe. He could see Bran, lips moving in silent prayer, Gildred, grim as a man at the gallows. Selvara, half hidden in the shadows, watching with an expression that was not quite pity, not quite satisfaction. He drew a breath and stepped forward. The heat struck him like a wall, yet it was not searing. It wrapped around him, heavy, suffocating, but strangely bearable. He took another step. Fire licked at his boots, then at his legs, crawling up his tunic. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some covered their mouths. Others shouted, demanding the fire consume him. The crystal at his chest pulsed harder. With each throb, the flame bent toward it, as though drawn. Whispers filled his ears, not from the crowd, but from within. "Burn, wolf, burn. Show them what you are." Rohan's teeth clenched. His knees buckled as the flame reached his chest. Pain tore through him, searing, yes, but not the pain of flesh burning. It was deeper. The flame clawed at his soul, dragging at the darkness lodged within him. The crystal shuddered, light spilling through the fabric, black and violet, twisting against the fire's gold. The hall cried out in terror. Some shouted that he was blessed. Others that he was cursed. The High Elder's staff slammed against stone, but even his voice was drowned by the storm of panic. Rohan staggered, hands clutched against his chest. For a heartbeat, he saw visions in the flame. His men kneeling in worship, a throne of frost and blood, Kaelor's shadowed face smiling from beyond the fire. His breath caught. He did not know if the flame was cleansing him or claiming him. Aelin surged forward, breaking from the guard's grasp, her voice raw. "Rohan, fight it. Don't let it take you." But when Rohan lifted his head, his eyes were no longer wholly his own. One burned with the fire's golden light. The other shone with a violet gleam, cold and unnatural. The crowd shrieked, and the brazier cracked. Flames surged higher, spilling out across the hall. The trial was no longer a judgment. It had become a war. The crack split the chamber like thunder. Stone groaned, and from the heart of the brazier a roar of fire erupted, leaping higher than any mortal flame had a right to climb. Gold turned white, white turned blue, until the blaze became a storm of both frost and fire, locked in battle. The hall of Frosthaven shuddered beneath the struggle, banners tearing free from their poles, smoke and ash swirling in the air. Rohan staggered within the inferno, his form barely visible through the blinding light. His tunic clung to him in tatters, his hair whipped by unseen winds, his body suspended between the fire's judgment and the crystal's defiance. One half of him seemed wreathed in holy flame, radiant as the dawn. The other half glimmered with an unnatural frost, jagged lines of black and violet ice crawling across his skin like veins of corruption. The crowd broke into chaos. Peasants screamed and fled for the doors, trampling one another in panic. Lords and ladies shouted for the guards, for the elder, for the gods themselves. Steel rang as soldiers tried to form a line, but no discipline could stand against the terror of the sight before them. "Contain him," Lord Dareth roared, his face wild with fear. "Cut him down before he brings the whole keep down upon us. Touch him and you doom us all." Lady Eris spat back, clutching at her furs as if they could ward her from the storm. "This is no man's fight, this is the ancestors' will." But no one could say with certainty whose will it was. Aelin fought her way through the stampede, shoving aside guards who sought to hold her back. Her eyes never wavered from Rohan. His scream cut through the thunder of flame and frost, a sound torn between agony and defiance. She reached the steps of the dais, heat blistering her skin, yet she did not turn away. "Rohan," she cried, "you are not his puppet. You are more than the crystal, more than Kaelor." For a moment, she thought he heard her. His head lifted, one eye gleaming gold, the other violet. The fire and the frost wavered, like a balance hesitating between two fates. His lips moved, shaping a word, her name. Then the laughter came, cold, echoing, everywhere at once. "You burn beautifully, wolf. But the fire will not cleanse you. It will forge you." Kaelor's voice spilled from the flames, filling the hall like poison gas. Men fell to their knees, clutching their ears. The High Elder dropped his staff, his eyes wide with terror. Rohan's body convulsed. The crystal blazed so bright it could no longer be mistaken for a hidden curse. It was a star of black ice burning through his chest. The flame of the ancestors surged to consume it, but instead the fire bent, twisted, as though shackled. And then the impossible happened. The two forces merged. Fire turned dark. Frost turned golden. A storm of burning ice cascaded outward, shards of crystal flame splintering across the chamber. A column of raw, blinding power shot upward, striking the ceiling, tearing through stone as though it were paper. The roof groaned. Stones cracked. A fracture split across the great hall's dome. Screams rose anew as dust rained down. "Out! Out!" shouted Bran, dragging men toward the gates. But few could move swiftly enough. Rohan fell to his knees within the storm. His hands clawed at his chest, at the crystal that pulsed like a heart beyond his own. For an instant, he thought he could tear it free, end it here, now, even if it killed him. But the frost spread faster, encasing his arms in jagged shards. Aelin leapt forward, seizing him before the frost could climb higher. The cold bit into her flesh, tearing her skin raw, but she held fast. "Fight it," she screamed, voice breaking. "You are Rohan of Frosthaven. Not Kaelor's shadow, not his thrall." Rohan's golden eye locked with hers. The violet eye blazed. For a heartbeat, he seemed torn between two masters. And then the dome cracked. With a sound like the world itself splitting, the ceiling gave way. Tons of stone collapsed in a single instant, the hall plunging into ruin, the trial consumed in fire, frost, and falling rock. The last thing Aelin saw was Rohan's hand reaching toward hers, half flesh, half ice, before the world turned to black. Smoke and dust clung to every corner of Frosthaven. The once proud hall lay in ruins, stones scattered like shattered teeth across the cold floor. The air was thick with the smell of scorched wood, molten stone, and a metallic tang that spoke of blood yet spilled. Silence settled like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. Those who survived the collapse staggered through the wreckage, dazed, coughing, and clutching whatever possessions remained in their hands. Aelin emerged first, dragging herself over jagged stones. Her cloak was shredded, her boots filled with dust and debris. And yet, amid the ruin, she called out, a voice raw, hoarse, but cutting through the smoke. "Rohan! Rohan, answer me!" Silence answered. Only the faint hum of residual magic in the air, the heartbeat of the crystal embedded in his chest, wherever it might be, responded. Scouts and soldiers moved cautiously among the rubble, calling names and searching for survivors. Shattered shields, splintered spears, and scorched banners littered the courtyard. No one dared approach the center of the hall where a jagged pit had opened, swallowing much of the inferno and the fallen debris. There, a faint glow pulsed, one black, one gold, and a violet shimmer threading through both. The crystal. Whispers began to ripple among the men. "He lives," one murmured. "No, that's not life. That's something else. By the gods, the Iceborn, is he." Aelin fought her way to the edge of the pit, heart-hammering. She could see his hand, gloved in frost and scorched flesh, reaching through the wreckage. A thin groan escaped his lips. "Hold on, Rohan," she yelled. "I'll pull you out." With the soldier's aid, she climbed into the pit. Every step was a gamble. Stones threatened to slide, the edges crumbling into the void below. Her hands reached his, trembling against the frozen shards that had encased his arms. "Don't let it take me," Rohan whispered, voice rasping, eyes half-lidded. One eye glimmered gold, the other violet, the mark of Kaelor's influence still clinging. "You're stronger than it, Rohan," Aelin said fiercely. "You've survived worse. You are Iceborn, not his thrall, yours." Slowly, with the effort of both courage and sheer muscle, she pulled him from the pit. Soldiers grabbed them, dragging Rohan onto safer ground. He collapsed, trembling and gasping, the crystal pulsing faintly in the dust. Aelin knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his chest to steady his ragged heartbeat. Around them, the survivors whispered, some in awe, some in fear. Lord Dareth and Lady Eris arrived, faces pale, lips pressed into tight lines. No one dared speak immediately. The elder's staff lay shattered, and the remaining council members stared, unsure of whether to celebrate survival or mourn disaster. "The flame, it did not consume him," Lord Dareth said finally, voice tight. "But neither is he untouched. What manner of being walks among us now?" Rohan lifted his head, eyes flickering between gold and violet. "I am still me," he rasped. "But Kaelor's hand, it is not gone. The crystal protects me, yet it binds me as well. I survived the trial. But the true fight begins now." Aelin's eyes narrowed. "Then we must act before he strikes again. Before Kaelor uses your power to bind you completely." The council looked uneasy. Some still murmured of exile, some of purging the crystal, others of praying to gods long silent. Political lines began to shift like smoke in the wind. Who would align with Rohan, and who would see this disaster as an opportunity to claim Frosthaven for themselves? In the distance, a raven's cry pierced the air. Its feathers shimmered with frost, and around its leg, a parchment fluttered. Aelin seized it quickly, eyes scanning the words. "He survives. And so shall the storm. Your enemies awaken. The wolf is not yet whole." Kaelor's signature lingered in the ink, sharp as a dagger. Rohan's hands tightened around the crystal. Pain lanced through his chest, the reminder that the sorcerer's tether was unbroken. Yet a fire burned in his golden eye, rivaling the violet, and in that moment, the survivors understood something crucial. He was no longer a man who simply bore the name Iceborn. He was a weapon, a symbol, and a storm waiting to be unleashed. The ruins of the hall trembled again, as though warning the world that the next chapter had already begun. The morning sun rose pale and weak, struggling to pierce the thick, frost-laden clouds that hung over Frosthaven. The ruins of the great hall glimmered with frost, each shattered stone catching the light like jagged silver. Soldiers patrolled cautiously, their footsteps crunching over debris and frozen ash. In the courtyard, Rohan sat propped against a fractured wall, the black crystal cradled in his hands. The pulse of its light echoed the rhythm of his own heartbeat, a subtle reminder that Kaelor's tether had not been broken, only restrained. Aelin knelt beside him, carefully brushing a strand of snow-dusted hair from his forehead. "You can't stay here all day," she said softly. "The men look to you. The council, they are restless. Fear spreads faster than frost." Rohan's golden eye flickered toward her, the violet one glimmering faintly in warning. "They fear more than frost, Aelin. They fear me. And Kaelor," he whispers still, "even through this crystal. I cannot rest, not while it binds me." Aelin's gaze hardened. "Then we use it, not as a chain, but as a weapon. You survived the trial. You survived the fire. We can survive the council." From the shadows, Lord Dareth and Lady Eris approached, their faces masks of calculated neutrality. Soldiers instinctively moved aside. The elder council member, still leaning on what remained of his staff, followed, his eyes clouded with a mix of suspicion and awe. "Lord Rohan," Dareth said, voice measured but edged with steel, "you walk among us still, and yet, you are changed. Your victory is undeniable, but your means, uncertain. How do we trust a man who channels the power of sorcery we cannot name?" Rohan's hand tightened on the crystal, its pulse resonating through his palm. "Trust is earned, Lord Dareth. And it is earned on the battlefield, not in council chambers. I saved our men. I saved Frosthaven. That is proof enough. Arissa's eyes glimmered with frustration. And if this weapon of yours turns against us? If Kaelor's hand finds its way through you, will you still be our savior? Or our undoing? Rohan's gaze met hers, fierce and unwavering. Then I will burn him first. I am Iceborn. I am not a pawn to be moved by his will. The council fell silent, uncertain how to respond. Some muttered that he should be exiled, others that he should be revered. The rift among them was raw, palpable, like the jagged frost along the courtyard stones. From the tower above, a horn sounded. Scouts returned, breathless, with reports of movement on the northern ridges. Figures cloaked in black, moving silently among the frozen forests. Kaelor's spies. Aylin's hand went to her dagger instinctively. They test us, she said. Kaelor's hand is already reaching for the pieces of Frosthaven he thinks he can claim. Rohan rose slowly, the crystal pulsing warmly against his chest. The frost on his boots and cloak shimmered faintly, a reminder of the lingering power within him. Then we will meet them before they reach the walls. If Kaelor wants a fight, he will find one. And if he wants me, he will find Iceborn. Soldiers scrambled to form ranks, banners raised, weapons at the ready. The courtyard filled with tension, every man and woman aware that this was no mere skirmish. This was a test of loyalty, of courage, of survival. Aylin moved beside Rohan, her breath misting in the frigid air. You cannot fight them alone, she warned. Even with the crystal, Kaelor will find a way to pierce your defenses. Rohan's gaze swept over his men. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, yet their eyes shone with determination. Then we fight together. Frosthaven stands, or we fall as one. In the north, the shadowed figures paused, their eyes glinting in the snow. They waited, unseen but watching, aware that the wolf they hunted was no longer just a man. He was a force, bound and yet unbroken, and the frost that clung to him promised both salvation and ruin. The first arrow flew. The war was beginning again. The first arrow cut through the winter air, its flight swift and deadly, striking the snow-dusted wall of the courtyard with a sharp crack. Soldiers ducked instinctively, shields raised, breath freezing in clouds around them. Rohan's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but the black crystal pulsed violently against his chest. Its warmth was no longer comforting, it throbbed with hunger, as if it knew the danger approaching long before his eyes could see it. Aylin shouted over the sudden clamor. They come from the ridge. The black-cloaked ones. Kaelor's agents. Rohan's violet eye narrowed. Then we give them something to remember. The frost around his boots thickened, curling upward, and a thin mist spiraled from his blade. He had not willed it, yet the ice obeyed his pulse, forming crystalline shards along the edges of the courtyard stones. The first wave descended, figures moving with predatory grace, throwing knives that seemed to vanish into the air and reappear inches from their targets. Rohan met them with steel, yet each swing carried the pulse of the crystal. The frost leapt, solidifying the ground beneath the attacker's feet, forcing them to stumble and shatter against the walls in frozen agony. Soldiers around him shouted, rallying to his side, inspired and terrified all at once. One young knight, barely more than a boy, pointed to a figure advancing alone, shrouded in shadow, its hood thrown back to reveal pale, almost translucent skin. Rohan, there. The figure moved with unnatural speed, darting between soldiers, each strike met with a hiss of frost. Rohan's blade flashed, slicing through the first wave, yet the figure seemed untouchable. Each swing of his sword drew laughter from the crystal, mocking, cold, unmistakably Kaelor's. Kaelor, Rohan growled. Show yourself. The shadow stopped, tilting its head, the wind swirling around its form. Why rush, Iceborn? The voice was layered, multiple tones whispering at once, a chorus of frost and shadow. Patience yields more than strength alone. Let them see you falter. Let them doubt. Rohan's jaw tightened. He felt the pull of the crystal again, a tug in his chest that demanded surrender. His limbs trembled as the frost leapt of its own accord, immobilizing not just foes, but the very earth beneath his boots. Soldiers cheered, then recoiled as they realized the power was no longer wholly under his control. Aylin's voice pierced his thoughts. You are stronger than this tether, Rohan. Focus. You are not a vessel, you are Iceborn. The words grounded him. For a heartbeat, he felt the pull weaken. His sword moved with intention again, slicing through the frozen forms of Kaelor's minions. Yet the shadow moved closer, faster than thought, and for the first time, Rohan felt fear, the kind that gnawed at his bones. Then, from the rear of the courtyard, a loud crash shattered the frigid air. A section of the wall had been breached, snow and stone tumbling into the yard. Another wave of enemies poured forth, spears glinting, blades dripping frost-kissed blood from their previous victims. Rohan's hand clamped over the crystal. Its pulse quickened, almost frantic. The frost along the courtyard floor surged, forming jagged ice towers that skewered the advancing soldiers, yet even as it killed, it whispered, reminding him that each life spilled fed Kaelor's will. Aelin leapt to his side, deflecting a dagger aimed at his back. "You will not let him claim you," she shouted, her blade dancing with lethal precision. "You will not serve him." Rohan's golden eye met hers, the fire within reigniting. "Then we end this," he said, voice hoarse but determined. With a surge of will, he focused, and the crystal's pulse aligned with his heartbeat instead of Kaelor's tug. Frost erupted from his sword, spiraling into the ranks of the attackers with devastating precision, freezing enemies mid-stride, leaving shattered statues in their wake. The courtyard fell silent, save for the hiss of melting ice and the heavy breaths of Rohan and his soldiers. Yet the shadow remained, hovering at the edge of the frost, its laughter echoing in his mind. Kaelor had not yet shown himself fully. The battle was won, but the war had only begun. Rohan clenched the hilt of his sword, frost and blood dripping from its edge. "You think this scares me, Kaelor?" he whispered. "I am Iceborn. You will learn. Every strike you make against me, every tether you throw, only sharpens the blade I carry for you." From the ridge, the figure disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving frost in its wake and a promise unspoken yet clear. Snow swirled through the streets of Frosthaven like restless spirits, draping rooftops and towers in white silence. The courtyard battle had ended hours ago, yet the city remained on edge. Soldiers patrolled in doubled ranks, their breath misting in the cold, eyes scanning shadows that seemed darker than usual. Even the wind felt heavier, carrying whispers that were not natural, as if Kaelor's presence had seeped into the stones themselves. Rohan sat alone in his chambers, the black crystal resting on the table before him. Its jagged edges pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of shadow and frost. He traced his fingers along its surface, feeling the subtle tug that reminded him Kaelor was never far. The victory earlier had been Pyrrhic. Each foe turned to ice had only strengthened the sorcerer's tether. Aelin entered silently, the rustle of her furs barely audible over the fire crackling in the hearth. Her silver eyes reflected concern, sharpened by understanding. "Rohan, you cannot do this alone. Even now, the council murmurs. Whispers of your powers grow louder than praise." Rohan's gaze lifted, shadowed and resolute. "Let them whisper. Kaelor has already begun sowing doubt. If I show weakness, the city will fall before he even strikes openly." She shook her head. "Strength is not merely the frost in your veins or the sword at your side. It is the trust of your people, trust that Kaelor seeks to erode. You must prove you are more than a vessel." The words weighed on him. He had felt it already, the hesitation in the soldier's eyes, the subtle distance in his counsel's manner. Yet beyond this, something deeper gnawed at him. The fear that the crystal might one day act without him entirely, turning savior into executioner. A sudden crash echoed from below. The sound of splintering wood and screaming reached the chamber, carried through the spiraling stairways. Rohan and Aelin exchanged a look, and without a word, he snatched his sword, its frost-laced edge gleaming even in dim light. The great hall doors burst inward. Kaelor's agents had returned, this time in force. Black-clad figures poured in, throwing fire and knives alike, exploiting every corridor, every shadow. Soldiers struggled to hold lines, some falling instantly under the dark frost that seemed to emanate from nowhere, striking without warning. Rohan's hand went to the crystal instinctively. Its warmth surged, threatening to overwhelm him. Yet instead of resisting, he focused, drawing upon it with control rather than fear. Frost erupted from the walls, entangling the intruders in crystalline webs, freezing limbs and weapons midair. Their screams were muffled by ice, yet still a voice reached him, mocking, distant, unmistakably Kaelor. "Every life you touch, wolf, strengthens me. Every triumph binds you closer." How long before you cannot tell where you end and I begin? Rohan gritted his teeth, forcing the crystal's pulse to synchronize with his own will rather than the sorcerer's. Each swing of his sword, each motion of frost, was deliberate, precise. But even as he fought, he realized the danger. Not all the intruders were human. Shadows flickered unnaturally, wraith-like forms merging with the crystal's own frost. Aelin fought by his side, steel meeting shadow in lethal arcs. Rohan, focus. Do not let him touch your mind, she shouted, deflecting a strike aimed at his back. The dagger shattered against the frost that coated his armor, fragments skittering across the stone floor. Rohan's heart thundered, each beat resonating with the crystal. He felt the lure of power, the temptation to let it dominate the battle entirely. The ice obeyed him, yet at every moment, he knew it could twist, could betray him if Kaelor's tether was strong enough. The intruders faltered, sensing resistance, yet Kaelor's voice remained, whispering in fragments, playful and cruel. Do you hear them, wolf? Their fear, their awe, all yours to command. Yet all their lives fuel me. Rohan froze for a heartbeat, realizing the true scale of the threat. Victory in battle no longer meant survival. Each triumph merely fed the sorcerer, strengthening his hold on the city, on the crystal, on him. He was trapped in a war of wills, one that required absolute control, not mere strength of arm. He turned, eyes blazing violet with resolve. Then we end this, he said aloud, frost crackling along his blade. With a surge, he hurled shards of ice into the advancing attackers, freezing them midair. The black frost spread like living fire, cutting through the agents, forcing them to retreat. Yet at the edge of the courtyard, a figure lingered, hood thrown back. Pale, serene, a smirk curling across features he would never forget. Kaelor had come, not to fight, but to observe, to test, to weave his shadow tighter around Rohan's fate. The crystal thrummed violently. Frost licked the stone underfoot. Rohan's jaw tightened as the distant laughter filled his mind. The war was far from over, and Kaelor's hand had only grown bolder. The night had grown heavier, each gust of wind carrying the scent of frost and fire. Frosthaven's towers stood silent, but the city was anything but calm. Rohan paced in his chambers, the black crystal cradled in both hands. Its pulse had grown stronger, almost demanding, each thrum echoing Kaelor's laughter in his mind. The victory in the courtyard had cost them dearly, not in men lost, but in the insidious bond the sorcerer had tightened with every icy strike. Aelin watched him from the doorway, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Rohan, every moment you linger with it, you let him whisper more freely. You must act. He ran a hand through his dark hair, frost clinging to the strands despite the fire burning in the hearth. Act how? The council will not understand. The crystal is not just a weapon. It is a leash. Kaelor is inside it, guiding me. To strike at him is to risk everything. She stepped closer, her voice lowering, firm. And to do nothing is to let him win. You may not control him fully yet, but there is one way. The Hermit's shard is a conduit. We can amplify its resistance to the tether, force the magic to bend. Rohan's eyes narrowed. The Hermit's gift had been a temporary reprieve, a shield that siphoned some of Kaelor's reach, but the cost had been immediate. Each battle left him weaker, each frostbite wound a reminder of the sorcerer's dominance. Amplify it? That would draw Kaelor's full attention, he will know. Exactly. Aelin's silver gaze held him like steel. And if he knows, he will act openly. We can see him, confront him directly, and strike at the tether. The risk is great, yes, but it is the only way to sever him without letting the crystal consume you entirely. Rohan hesitated, his breath misting in the cold air. Kaelor's voice echoed faintly in his skull, teasing, taunting. Every choice binds you tighter, wolf. Every strike, every heartbeat, belongs to me. He clenched his fists, drawing frost across the floor as he moved, a visual pulse of his anger and fear. The room chilled instantly, ice forming along the walls, creeping toward the hearth's fire. Then we make him see the wolf does not kneel, Rohan said. His voice was low, steady, but every word carried the weight of resolve and desperation. By midnight, they were ready. The crystal was wrapped in the Hermit's protective runes, set atop a circle of carved stones Aelin had prepared from the old archives beneath Frosthaven. Candles flickered around it, shadows dancing with unnatural sharpness. The air thrummed with anticipation, the kind that precedes storms and wars alike. Rohan approached, blade in one hand, crystal in the other. Each step echoed against the stone floor, yet within him, the whispers of Kaelor grew louder, more insistent. Do you feel it? My strength, my reach. You cannot resist entirely, you will fail, wolf. He forced himself to breathe, forcing focus with every measured step. No, he said aloud. I will decide what I am. Not you. Not this cursed crystal. Aelin's hands hovered above the circle of runes, murmuring incantations in a language older than Frosthaven itself. The crystal pulsed violently, thrumming against Rohan's chest, cold as the dead and alive with Kaelor's presence. A shockwave of energy rattled the walls, throwing dust from the ceiling and extinguishing some of the candles. Rohan gritted his teeth, planting the sword into the ground beside the crystal. Frost spiraled from his boots upward, weaving into the runes. The circle glowed, a mix of blue and black light that carved shadows into the walls, long and twisted. He could feel Kaelor's awareness, a presence now drawn entirely to the circle. And then he heard it. Movement outside the chamber. Not soldiers, something lighter, more deliberate. Kaelor's agents, or perhaps Kaelor himself, testing, probing, observing. The whisper of the tether was stronger than ever, tugging at his mind, whispering fears of failure, visions of the city burning if he faltered. Rohan steadied himself, eyes locking with Aelin's. I cannot fail. Her nod was slight, steel in her gaze. Then do not. The crystal quivered violently, a heartbeat of darkness against his chest. The frost around the runes stretched outward, meeting the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. And then, as the circle's glow peaked, a figure appeared in the doorway. Pale, robed, face hidden by shadow. Kaelor had come. Rohan realized the truth instantly. The tether would not break quietly. To sever Kaelor's hand, he would have to confront him directly. And Kaelor had come to test if the wolf could bite the hand that feeds him. The crystal pulsed one final time, sharp, like the crack of thunder in an empty sky. Frost erupted from its core, sending shards across the floor and walls. Rohan lifted his sword, eyes blazing violet in the cold light. Then let him come, he growled. Let him see the wolf's teeth. The chamber trembled as Kaelor stepped fully into the circle's glow, his robes flowing like liquid shadow. The sorcerer's eyes burned faintly red beneath the hood, a cold fire that penetrated Rohan's very soul. Every heartbeat of the black crystal resonated with the tether Kaelor had woven, thrumming against Rohan's chest like a drum of doom. You dare, Kaelor hissed, voice scraping the air like ice against steel, to turn my leash into a snare? Do you think yourself clever, wolf? Rohan's hand tightened around his sword hilt, frost crawling up his arm as he met Kaelor's gaze. I am no one's wolf, he said. Not yours, not the council's. And not this cursed crystal's. Kaelor's laughter rippled through the room, a hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Bold words for a man whose flesh and blood are tied to my will. Every strike you delivered to your enemies, every death you caused, fed me. And now, you wish to break me? The crystal throbbed violently, thrashing against Rohan's grip. Images flashed in his mind. Visions of the frozen battlefield, of the raiders' shattered bodies, of his own hands slick with ice and blood. Kaelor's tether was alive, a serpent coiled around his soul, squeezing, whispering doubts, fear, and hatred. Aelin stepped forward, staff in hand, murmuring protective words. Blue light danced around her, brushing the frost that crawled toward her from the circle. You will not hold him forever, Kaelor. The tether is weakening, she shouted, her voice carrying the weight of the ancients. Kaelor's eyes flickered toward her, a momentary snarl breaking through his composure. Ah, so she fights as well. Very well. Let us see whose power will snap first. Without another word, Kaelor lashed his hands outward. Shadows leapt from his fingers, swirling into jagged tendrils that sought the crystal, trying to twist, corrupt, and reclaim it. Rohan staggered, the crystal burning against his chest, a scream of frost echoing in his mind. The frost around the circle spiraled upward, reacting to Kaelor's magic, clashing in frozen explosions with the shadowy tendrils. Sparks of dark fire and pale ice filled the chamber, illuminating the sorcerer's sharp, cruel features and the white-hot resolve in Rohan's eyes. Rohan advanced, sword raised, each step sending shards of ice spinning across the stone floor. He struck at the nearest shadow, freezing it mid-air, shattering it with a violent crack. But Kaelor moved with impossible speed, shadow forms multiplying, attacking from every angle. "You think brute force will free you?" Kaelor taunted, his voice a serrated edge in Rohan's mind. "Your strength is mine to command. Every blow you make, every thought of resistance, it strengthens me." Rohan gritted his teeth. He could feel the crystal's heartbeat, cold and insistent, aligning with his own. In a moment of clarity, he realized the truth. Kaelor's tether relied not only on the crystal, but on Rohan's fear. Doubt was the key, and if he could still his mind, he could turn the tether back on its master. Breathing through the pounding in his chest, Rohan lifted the crystal high. Frost erupted outward, forming a prism of light that cut through Kaelor's shadows. The sorcerer hissed, stepping back as the tether resisted, screaming against the crystal's sudden defiance. "You cannot control me," Rohan shouted, feeling frost surge through his veins, through his limbs, every fiber of his being vibrating with the heart's power. "You cannot feed off me any longer." Kaelor's hood fell back in a gust of wind, revealing a pale, angular face twisted in anger. His hands shot forward, a wave of shadow crashing toward Rohan. But this time, the shadows shattered against the crystal's aura, fragments of Kaelor's power scattering across the chamber. Rohan seized the moment. He slammed the crystal into the ground, focusing every ounce of will, every pulse of frost, every beat of the heart embedded in him. The chamber trembled, the circle of runes burning white-hot against the darkness. Kaelor's tether screamed, a sound that shook bones and rattled hearts. And then, silence. Kaelor stumbled backward, eyes wide, his control over the crystal broken, his shadows dissipating like smoke in a gale. The sorcerer's power recoiled, leaving him exposed, mortal, vulnerable. Rohan's chest heaved. Sweat and frost mixed on his skin, his breath visible in ragged clouds. Around him, the shards of ice clinked, the circle pulsing faintly as if breathing. He looked at Aelin, whose face shone with relief and caution. "It's over?" she asked. Rohan did not answer immediately. He knew better than to believe Kaelor defeated. The sorcerer was wounded, yes, but cunning, patient, and alive. The tether might be severed, but the battle for Frosthaven, and for Rohan's soul, was far from complete. Kaelor's voice, cold and hissing, echoed once more from the shadows. "Enjoy your victory, wolf. It is fleeting. The leash may be broken, but the hunt continues. And one day, you will bleed for it." Rohan tightened his grip on the sword and the crystal, frost curling around both. "Then I will be ready," he whispered, eyes blazing with unyielding fire. The chamber's glow faded, leaving only the faint hum of residual frost. Outside, the winds howled against the towers of Frosthaven, carrying whispers of what had occurred, whispers that would grow into legends and warnings in equal measure. The first strike had been made, the tether tested and bent, but the war between wolf and sorcerer was just beginning. The chamber was silent, save for the faint crackle of residual frost and the hum of the black crystal still clutched in Rohan's hand. Kaelor had vanished into the shadows, leaving only whispers of his malice behind, like smoke curling into the corners of the room. Rohan's muscles ached, frost and exertion gnawing at his body, yet he felt a fierce clarity he had not known for weeks. Aelin stepped beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said, her voice steady but with a tremor of relief. "The tether, it's broken. For now." Rohan exhaled slowly, feeling the ice in his chest recede, the crystal's pulse aligning once more with his own, not Kaelor's. He wanted to believe her words, wanted to rest, to let the frost melt from his limbs. But deep inside, he knew the war was far from over. Kaelor was patient and cunning, and patience was the weapon of a sorcerer who had lived for centuries. "We cannot linger," Rohan said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, yet it carried the weight of command. "Frosthaven must know what transpired. The council, they will demand answers. And the people, they must not see weakness, even in victory." Aelin nodded. "Then we return at once. But be ready. Not all will celebrate your triumph." The journey back through Frosthaven's frozen streets was tense. Even as townsfolk peeked from behind shuttered windows, whispering of the strange frost that had erupted in the council's chamber, Rohan felt their fear more than their admiration. He had become a figure larger than life, a lord of frost and shadow, yet their eyes betrayed suspicion. Some saw him as a savior, others, a danger. By the time they reached the council hall, the chamber was already in disarray. Lords and ladies, wrapped in furs and cloaks, murmured in tight clusters. Their faces were a mix of awe and anxiety, hands gripping staffs or the edges of tables as though to brace themselves against an unseen storm. The High Elder, white-bearded and trembling, rose to meet Rohan. "Lord Iceborn," he began, voice wavering, we have heard the accounts of the chamber. The frost, the crystal, the power wielded against Kaelor. How do we know you are not corrupted?" Rohan set the crystal upon the table, its dark surface pulsing faintly. "You do not know the measure of corruption," he said evenly. "I was tethered to Kaelor, yes. I fought, yes. But the tether is broken. The power is mine to command, not his. And the council itself must decide whether I stand as lord, or fall as a cautionary tale." Lady Eris, her furs gleaming under torchlight, spat coldly. "A tethered wolf is still a wolf. And wolves bite their masters. How long before you turn your teeth on Frosthaven itself?" Rohan's gaze was ice, hard and unyielding. "Long enough for you to regret such words, if they are spoken again." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension, as if the very stones were holding their breath. The High Elder raised his staff, calling the chamber to order. "We will not yield to fear nor to legend alone. Lord Rohan will submit to the trial by the flame. The fire will judge him. It is ancient. It is impartial. If he passes, he is truly our lord. If it burns him—" His voice faltered, and he shook his head. "Then we will know the truth of the man behind the frost." The hall exhaled collectively, tension rippling through every corner. Rohan's hand brushed the crystal again, feeling its warmth and weight. He knew the trial would not be mere spectacle, it was more than judgment. It was a test of soul, spirit, and command over what had nearly consumed him. That night, the pyres were lit. The flame of the ancestors roared to life, tongues of fire licking the night sky. Frosthaven's people gathered outside the hall, their breaths misting in the cold, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Torches flickered, casting shadows that danced like specters across stone walls. Rohan stepped into the circle, Aelin at his side. Silence fell. The wind carried only the scent of smoke, the promise of heat, and the echoes of what had been fought and nearly lost. He raised the black crystal, and for a moment, he felt Kaelor's distant laughter, thin, cruel, fading, like the dying echo of a storm. Then he stepped forward into the flames. Heat and light surged around him, yet the crystal's pulse steadied, anchoring him, feeding the fire without letting it consume him. The frost inside him shivered, then melded with the fire, neither conquering the other. Rohan emerged unscathed, his eyes blazing, the fire's glow reflecting in their depths. The council, the lords, the townsfolk, all stared, stunned. He had passed the trial. But outside the hall, a shadow lingered. Kaelor's whisper rode the wind, faint and insidious. "Enjoy the fire, wolf. Soon, the frost will return." Rohan clenched his jaw. The trial had ended, yes, but the war for his soul, for Frosthaven, and for the balance between fire and frost, was only beginning. And somewhere in the dark, beyond walls and mountains, Kaelor plotted his next move. The Iceborn's legend had survived the fire. But the shadow of the sorcerer would haunt every triumph to come.